Well, for more on China and New Zealand's relations, I'm joined by Jason Young. He's an associate professor at the University of Wellington. He teaches at the School of History, Philosophy, Political Science and International Relations. He's also a research fellow at the university's New Zealand Contemporary China Research Centre. Welcome to the show.
And good evening, Rachelle.
Now, as we know, this is Prime Minister Ardern's first visit to China since taking office. So what signals does Ardern want to send to China, as well as the business community back home in New Zealand?
Well, I think the key signal that the Prime Minister's visit was intending to send, and I think did actually achieve that, was that the China relationship is very important for New Zealand, that the relationship is strong, and to put to bed some of the questions about some of the challenges that we've seen in the relationship over the last few years.
And so talk about the circumstances surrounding this visit, especially the timing.
Well, the timing is obviously not ideal from a New Zealand perspective, considering that just a few weeks ago we had the tragic terrorist attack in Christchurch. And so the Prime Minister has been very, very busy dealing with the aftermath of that and also putting through new legislation in Parliament to make stronger gun control laws here in New Zealand. And I guess the fact that she went to Beijing, even if only for one day, really is testimony to the fact that China is an important relationship for New Zealand, and that we really wanted to take the opportunity to have a state visit.
And we've certainly seen that importance highlighted, with New Zealand being the first country to have an FTA with China. How would you say the bilateral economic and trade relationship has really evolved over the years?
So the 2008 Free Trade Agreement has, by most accounts here in New Zealand, been an incredible success for New Zealand. So trade, two-way bilateral trade with China has tripled since 2008. And a big part of that has also been the increase in New Zealand exports to China. And we, as the earlier report noted, we have a trade surplus with China. But we've also seen growth in services industries, so the number of Chinese international students at New Zealand education facilities has been increasing, and we now have China as the second largest source of tourists into New Zealand, and that's a big growth industry as well. Of course, tourism is our largest part of the economy. But of course, the agreement was... Oh, sorry.
Sure. Looking ahead, but basically to kind of lay the groundwork for what's happening with New Zealand's economy, we saw that the Reserve Bank of New Zealand cited weaker global economic outlooks, including from Asian trade partners like China, slower domestic growth in 2018, a softer housing market, as well as weaker business confidence and weaker business investment as really contributing to its more cautious outlook. What role do you think China can play in perhaps alleviating some of these headwinds?
So if we look back to 2008, when the world was struck by the global financial crisis, one of the great anchors and great stabilities for the New Zealand economy was our growing economic relationship with China. The Chinese economy is still growing. It's the growth has slowed, but it's certainly growing at a rapid pace compared to most or all advanced economies. And so the Chinese economy creates new opportunities for New Zealand businesses at the same time as creating a very stable market for New Zealand businesses to sell into.
Now, let's also look at the US-China trade war. It does appear to be moving in a more hopeful direction after several rounds of talks. But as an ally of both countries, and with China as New Zealand's biggest trade partner, how is New Zealand balancing its economic interests between the US and China?
Well, I think that the New Zealand position is one which strongly supports international rules-based order, having international institutions like the World Trade Organizations take care of the rules of trade so that all countries can compete fairly. So while we share some of the concerns that the United States Trade Representative Office put out in the Section 301, and we're very happy to see that both China and the United States are actively trying to deal with their trade frictions, at a very fundamental level, New Zealand would prefer to see the focus being put back on WTO and multilateralism.
Now, we know that there has been some controversy over New Zealand's treatment of Huawei's 5G technology in the country. But break down some of the key issues that you think have really put a strain on overall bilateral ties.
Well, I think the Huawei question certainly raised some issues in bilateral discussions. There have been other discussions about sort of trying to understand what New Zealand's Pacific Reset means for China's role in the region. There's been questions about China's foreign policy behavior, questions about US-China relations. There's always questions about human rights in any bilateral dialogue, including issues around Xinjiang. And I think there's generally also just a question of how we, as a small liberal democracy at the bottom of the South Pacific, engage in a region which is rapidly changing.
All right, thank you for your insights. Jason Young there, Associate Professor at the University of Wellington and Research Fellow at the university's New Zealand Contemporary China Research Centre.